Welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Mark Hitchcock, and on today's program is that the Middle East conflict drags on. There have been some major developments there this past week that show that Israel, I think, is rapidly gaining the upper hand, really on every front. And so I want to look at Israel's growing success against Iran and its axis of resistance, and see how Israel, really at every turn, seems to be gaining momentum. I mean, its enemies seem to be showing some very critical cracks that could bring about a significant sea change for that entire region in the not too distant future. Now, before we get to that, I want to mention the subscriber-only section today. And it's a very important subscriber-only section because I want to talk about the issue that I know is weighing heavily on the mind of every American. And that is the elections that are coming up next Tuesday. And I want to talk about some prophetic implications of these elections, of who becomes president. And I've got 6 words that begin with I that we're going to look at that I think will have some really profound implications depending on what happens on Tuesday. But I also want to read some scripture that's going to reassure us that whatever happens, that God is in control. God's the one who's putting the puzzle pieces into place for his plan and his timetable. And I hope it will give us a lot of peace and a lot of comfort and rest in him. Again, what I want to talk about, though, today is Israel's gaining momentum against this axis of resistance and against even Iran itself. And so I want to begin by talking about Hezbollah. Hezbollah is obviously Israel's enemy up in Lebanon that they've been just relentlessly bombing. The Jerusalem Post this week had an article that says, Hezbollah beginning to crack. Wave of desertions threatens Lebanese terror group. Now that caught my eye when I saw that. They're beginning to have mass desertions. Here's what this Jerusalem Post article said. Said, since Israel began ground operations in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah terrorists have repeatedly begun to abandon their posts and flee to Syria. Those defecting, according to the source, are not reporting when summoned by senior terrorists and not waiting in their assigned locations. Other terrorists have reportedly fled to Syrian territory with their families, attempting to avoid any confrontation with Israel at close range. So many of these terrorists who talked so boldly for many years are fleeing for their lives. They don't want to face Israel at close range. I really think from what I've read that these exploding pagers among Hezbollah, the constant Israeli bombardment in Beirut, and the assassination one after another of their leaders has had just a dramatic psychological effect on these Hezbollah fighters. But the Jerusalem Post article goes on and says this, as a result of combatants abandoning their posts, Hezbollah is now reportedly struggling to communicate with its men on the ground. There are also fears that the defections, now mainly a phenomenon in southern Lebanon, will spread to terrorists throughout the country. I mean, it's being claimed. So they're fearing mass defections there among Hezbollah. Now, here's another interesting story. Hezbollah has named a new leader. You remember that Nasrallah was killed, and then his immediate successor was killed, and then I think the successor to the successor was also taken out. But they've named a new leader. His name is Naim Qassem. And within a few hours, though, of the announcement of him becoming the new head of Hezbollah, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant posted a photograph of this new leader on X with this caption, temporary appointment, not for long. So they're going to be gunning for him as well, which again will just continue to have this eroding effect, I think, upon the psychology of these Hezbollah terrorists. So Hezbollah seems to be slowly unraveling there to the north of Israel. Now, what about Hamas? Obviously, that war has been going on now for over a year. And one article says this, Israel recently trapped hundreds of terrorists inside a refugee camp, including a lot of senior operatives. These Hamas operatives and fighters had gone to this refugee camp to kind of immerse themselves there with the people. And they used the population there as human shields. And as people tried to escape, some of their own people, they would shoot them in the legs as they try to escape. So that's the kind of people that they're dealing with. According to the IDF, the remaining terrorists in this area, in this camp, were encircled by IDF troops. 60 of these terrorists surrendered and hundreds of them were killed. So this is a major development in Hamas. They took out a mass number of Hamas terrorists really in this one this one operation. Israel knows that to have lasting peace, Hamas has to be destroyed. They know that. They can't leave any remnant of it. And I don't think they're going to quit until that goal is achieved. And again, we have a lot of people in our current administration that continue to try to push Israel to have a ceasefire. But Israel doesn't want a ceasefire. They want to finish the job. Because if they don't, all it's going to do is just push the can down the road, allow these terrorists to reassemble, to reorganize, to rearm, and to become stronger the next time. So Israel seems to be doing a lot of damage against Hezbollah. Obviously, they've just totally leveled Hamas. But now I want to talk about Iran. Iran is boldly threatening now to retaliate against Israel for its retaliation. So we're getting now to where there's been a retaliation. There's been a retaliation for the retaliation. Israel's threatening to retaliate against the retaliation, against the retaliation. It just keeps going. So it's just a cycle of retaliatory strikes. And make no mistake in all of this, Israel and Iran are at war. These aren't just retaliatory strikes. When you're fighting with another country and striking them like this, these nations are at war. USA Today this week, their headline said, bitter, unimaginable consequences. Iran warns of reprisal for the Israel attack. So they're going to attack Israel again. They're announcing bitter, unimaginable consequences. So Iran has recently reported that it plans to triple its military budget. Now that's a massive increase. And the reason for that is they know that war is on the horizon. They know they're in a war already. And they know that they're not sufficiently prepared because Israel in those strikes did all kinds of damage to Iran's defenses that I think left a lot of their bases and other places over there very exposed. And Israel knows that, and they're going to seize the opportunity. If Israel knows that Iran's getting ready to triple its military budget, what is Israel going to do? They're going to attack before they have the opportunity, obviously, to spend that money and to increase their military readiness. Now, Israel did not hit Iranian oil infrastructure or nuclear sites during the most recent strikes. I think a lot of that was the United States put pressure on them for that. But I believe that will change in future strikes. Iran's defenses were massively compromised during these strikes by Israel, and Israel did that, I think, to pave the way for some future more destructive attacks. Took out a lot of their defenses. Israel's military chief said this: if Iran makes the mistake of launching another missile barrage at Israel, we'll once again know how to reach Iran with capabilities that we did not even use this time. So Iran now is threatening to retaliate, and Israel's threatening to retaliate back if they do that. And they said, we're going to use things that we didn't even use this time at all. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel said this in the Jerusalem Post. Here's a headline. Said Netanyahu vows to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons following these ADF strikes. So he said that many times. Our presidents here in the United States have said that as well. But it says Israel is determined to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Monday. Stopping the Iranian nuclear program, he says, is at the forefront of our minds. And for obvious reasons, I cannot share with you all our plans and actions in this regard. But they're not going to let them get nuclear weapons. Our long-term strategy, he says, which I hope will be achieved in the near future, is to dismantle the axis of evil, cut off its arms in the south and in the north, to exact a heavy price from Iran and its proxies, and to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. So I think this strike was an initial strike for preparing for a future strike. Now, this is one of the more interesting articles I've read in a while, the headline I'm getting ready to give you from Fox News. I encourage you to look this up and read it online. It's a fascinating article. It says this: world awaits Iran regime change as fight with Israel escalates. Key lies in uniting minorities. Now that caught my eye, and the article says that regime change in Israel could be on the horizon. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel has been saying that repeatedly. He's been encouraging the people in Iran to rise up and throw off this wicked mullah regime. But I didn't realize this, but ethnic minority groups make up 50% of Iran's population. And there's a growing desire among these groups to overthrow the regime. Now, an expert on Iran in this Fox News article said this: if there is prolonged war and instability inside Iran, in other words, if there's a revolution or an insurrection inside Iran, countries like Turkey, Russia, and China would intervene either directly or through proxies to seize territories in Iran they consider important for their own national interests. So it's not that they would come and defend Iran. They would come and make sure that territories within Iran that they want don't fall into the wrong hands. That's fascinating to me. This expert said, there is a rising concern among political elites in the Islamic Republic that the groundwork for a hybrid war may be being laid, a scenario in which internal dissidents would collide with external military threats. So you'd actually have people within Iran who are revolutionaries fighting external armies, who are then coming in like Turkey and Russia and China, trying to take over parts of Iran. You'd have these dissident groups within Iran fighting those people for their territory. Now, as I read that, I thought, how would this affect Ezekiel 38 if this happened? Because I know what many people would immediately say. They'd say, well, look, if the mullah regime in Iran fails and all of that happens, then Iran is kind of taken off the table as a big-time invader of Israel. But if this article's correct, and if, Turkish, Chinese, and Russian forces came in and took over parts of Iran, well, when the Magog invasion occurs, we know Turkey will be part of it. We know Russia will be part of it. And they would simply bring the parts of Iran that they have control over with them to help them in this invasion. So it wouldn't affect in any way really a future prophecy about Iran and Persia and territory from that part of the world coming in to Israel in the end times for this invasion, Ezekiel 38. But that's a really interesting twist, I think, to this entire scenario in the Middle East today. If there were to be this regime change in Iran, and could send a lot of people scrambling to gain territory there. But what all this highlights to me simply is things are happening so quickly, it's often difficult to keep up. And I know that's one of the reasons that many of you watch these videos every week and you're subscribers at endtimes.com, because you want to keep up with these fast changing stories. But what we do know for sure is that God is moving the puzzle pieces into place to bring the ancient prophecies of Scripture to fulfillment. And one key puzzle piece in all of that role, I believe, is the role that the United States might play in some of these events. And so we want to ask the question, do the upcoming elections have any effect on the timeline of future events? And that's what I want to answer as we go to this subscriber-only section. And so if you're not a subscriber at endtimes.com, you'd like to be, you can go there to that website and you can sign up there for just $7 a month and have access to a great treasure trove of information that'll help you understand the times in which we live. So let's go now to that subscriber-only section, talk about these upcoming elections, what prophetic implications that will have, and we'll know the results of the election, Lord willing, when I see you next time. God bless you. We'll see you then.